So, Pankaj, we are supposed to start in 5 minutes.
Let us start, please.
My should we start now? It's already 8:35. Pankaj,
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
director sir is there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sir, can you hear me? Sir,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
so let us start, sir. Then people will start because it's already 5 minutes. So let us start. And because all our speakers are there, we will just start, sir.
Let us begin. Let us begin.
Sir, I'm starting. Okay. Good evening to all from India. In the Indian time, it's 8:30 here in the evening. I'm seeing in the chat box and the participants list, there are participants from different parts of the world. And here, a great welcome from Gandhi, Smriti, and Darshan Samiti. In this interesting dialogue that we have tried to organize on increasing the visibility of women in conflict resolution, negotiations, and mediation. It's an extremely important topic going by various international efforts in this direction. In 2000, the Security Council, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 talked about women, peace, and security. And in that resolution, it urged the Secretary General to appoint more women for senior UN peace-related positions and to involve in the decision-making in different peace processes, negotiations, and mediation. In this context, there has been various efforts worldwide to promote the participation of women in the peace processes, negotiations, and mediations. Also, there has been a greater effort to, engender the peace processes. So, keeping these in mind and the importance that it has in the global context, especially in all the countries across the world, Gandhi, Smriti, and Darshan Samiti, which is the National Memorial of Mahatma Gandhi, basically is going to organize this program, and essentially we are trying to have a series of these peace dialogue here. In this context, we have this thrust of the peace dialogue with some very, very eminent people from all across the world who have been working in this area of women and peace building in a big way, and we're really honored to have them here. Before I introduce them to the audience here, to the participants here, let me share with you quickly the objectives of this peace dialogue. The first is to delve on the significance of engendering the peace processes, negotiations, and mediations at global level, national level, and community level. The second is to look at the gender differences in peace processes, negotiations, and mediation. Third is underline the continuing invisibility of women in peace processes and mediations. Why the women are still, invisible in most of the peace processes across the world, whether it's at the community level or the national level or the global level. What are the different strategies we have for enhancing women's participation at all levels, international, national, and community? And look at the possible innovative framework. Enhance the gender-sensitive mediation and negotiation capacity at international, regional, national levels, and explore on how to create more consultative mediation processes through the promotion of both the effective participation of women and gender sensitivity in the design and substance of peace agreements. Sharing innovative case studies of women in negotiations and mediations from all across the world. In this context, we have 5 eminent speakers with us today who will be focusing on some of these objectives, and they will also talk region-wise, right from the South Asian region to the entire Asian region, Asia Pacific, Africa, Americas, North America, Latin America. So it will be very, very interesting situations over there. And with us, we have the following respected speakers. And in fact, after I introduce them, I will request our Honorable Director of Gandhi, Smriti, and Darshan Samiti, Mr. Dipanker Shri Gyan, to formally welcome them. So the speaker here is Dr. Betnedette Muthein. She is a facilitator, researcher, and poet in South Africa. And she has been the founder of the African Peace Research and Education Association, and she has served as the Executive Council of the International Peace Research Association. And she has been in the advisory boards of different international journals like Human Security Studies and Journal of Human Security. We have Dr. Gerson. She is a very, very senior peace educator. She's the Education Director of the International Institute on Peace Education in the United States and a former co-director of Peace Education Center, Teachers College, Colombia University. We have with us Dr. Matt Meyer. He is an internationally noted author, historian, and also serving as the Co-Secretary General of the International Peace Research Association. He has been active with the International Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Africa Support Network Coordinator of the War Resisters International. We have with us Ms. Dinah Lakehal, the Program Officer of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, and she has been the focal point for Middle East and North Africa, and she has been involved in the work of localization of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and different aspects of women and peace building. To chair this session, to chair this dialogue, we have eminent professor from India, Professor Vidya Jain. She is going to chair today's e-dialogue, and she has been the principal of she is an eminent Gandhian scholar. She has been the principal of the Maharaji College of Jaipur, one of Asia's biggest girls' college. And also she is elected as the convener of the Non-Violence Commission of the International Peace Research Association, and she was the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Peace Research Association. She was also the Deputy Secretary General of APRA from 2010 to 2012. So we are really honored to have all these eminent speakers here, and this is the first in the series of dialogues that we are trying to have in this situation on the issue of promotion of women in conflict resolution, negotiations, and mediation. Without wasting any time, may I request our Honorable Director, Mr. Dipanker Shri Gyan, to welcome all the speakers and the participants to this very, very significant dialogue that we are organizing today. Thank you.
A proper salutation to all the respected guests from their time zone, as I am not aware who is in the morning, who is in the evening. So I welcome Dr. Janet Gerson, Dr. Betnedette Muthein, Dr. Matt Meyer, Dr. Dinah Lakehal, and Professor Vidya Jain in this e-dialogue on a very interesting subject of utility of women conflict in conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation. Over the period of time, the society has only recognized the mediators in the form of normally male. That's the patriarchal society. But most of the time, even in the small domestic issues, the women happens to be the best mediator, best negotiator, and best conflict managers. Over the period of time, we will find the history throughout the world. The women are the mostly in the conflict zone right from beginning, and that has given them an inherent expertise of managing all the conflicts through negotiation, dialogue, mediation, and all the other tools used for the conflict resolution. I find myself very privileged that we even thought of organizing such a e-dialogue or this meeting along with 5 well-known peace builders and peace workers of the world on this very, very important issue. Had the occasion to hear Matt Meyer sir and Vidya Jain ma'am, and I found both of them excellent in their understanding, and particularly the understanding of the Gandhian way of doing all these things. I am also amazed to see that people from different part of the world are participating in this webinar, and even one lady, I guess from Nairobi, has written that it is very chill here and it is very cool, and still I am connected I want to hear all these things. It is the success of the program. I congratulate my friends in Gandhi Darshan for organizing all this program and taking pain and efforts for this e-dialogue. I must appreciate the efforts of Dr. Vidya Jain, who has been the lady behind all the organizers, and she facilitated all the resource person, and she shaped this meeting in such a beautiful way that the meeting is going to take place just now. And I think all of you who have gathered in this meeting through their internet connectivity are really the beneficiaries of the beautiful words from all the 5 learned resource persons. I know most of you are interested in understanding what's the new they are going to tell to you. I'm sure that all these resource persons have a different angle of understanding all these issues, and they will explain their experiences as well as their ideas. This webinar will be a meaningful dialogue for all of us, and I request my program officer, Dr. Kundu, to kindly make a group. We are 64 joining this all webinar. Make a group so that we can make forward this dialogue in the other part of the world. And this must have some imprint in the conflict resolution throughout the world. The 50% of the population matters, and that's their role matters. Their role is more important than anybody else. And once we can do that, I think we can do justice to ourselves, because through that conflict resolution, the peace will be established, and the ultimate aim of every Gandhian is to establish peace in this society. Thank you all for participating, for sparing your time, and having some sort of interaction in the end. With these words, I say goodbye to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the welcome address. And now, may I request Madam Vidya Jain, who is going to chair this e-dialogue, to kindly take over. Madam Vidya Jain, I'm sure she's there. Madam Vidya Jain. Pankaj, can you please? Yeah, ma'am is there. Pankaj, can you please switch on her microphone, Madam Vidya Jain? Pankaj?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Madam Vidya Jain? Madam, can you hear me? Yeah. Please switch on your microphone. You are not audible.
Well, I'm here.
No, Madam Vidya Jain is not audible at all.
Sorry, I'll check out and see the tape. Bye.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Well, I can hear Janet.
I can also
Hello.
hear you.
Madam Betty, we're just going to take a pause while Vidya is
is getting onto the audio to say, Betty, stay just where you are. We can see you. We can hear you. We appreciate you as a pioneer for all of us in this work. And we wish you happy birthday, all at the same time.
And Janet too. Happy birthday to Janet as well.
Yes, Janet, a little bit younger, a little bit less of a pioneer, but no less of an important figure who also has a birthday. Thank you, Betty.
Ma'am, Betty, ma'am, it's a great honor that you have joined our program. It's a great honor from Gandhi, Smriti, and Darshan Samiti. We are really honored that you joined this dialogue. Thank you, ma'am, for joining, ma'am.
Madam Vidya, now can you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There you are. Excellent.
Yes, yes.
Oh, wow, good. So, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Veda Vyas, and thank you, Dipanker Shri Gyan for the warm welcoming words for all of us. This gives me immense pleasure to greet you all. Namaskar. Friends, you would agree that it is the worst time we are living in. The one and the only silver lining on this otherwise dark zone is the recognition by some of us that conflicts can be resolved through negotiations, mediations, and deliberations. And the answers to the various questions can be found through non-violence. Through non-violence, we can build bridges of understanding and reconciliation. With peace in our mind and soul, we can build our common future with confidence. With peace in our mind, we can build common future. Let us make non-violence a way of life. Diffuse tensions by talking, deliberating, and discussing. The need today is to actively think, analyze, and participate in several transnational alliances to create a culture of peace. Thus, peace lovers of the world, men and women, unite. We have nothing to lose but agony, pain, hatred, greed, intolerance, poverty, slavery, and apartheid. Friends, it's true that world today is divided by inequalities of class, caste, race, region, religion, and language. But the most comprehensive and pervasive of all inequalities is of gender. These profound inequalities extend to every aspect of life: nutrition, education, livelihood, leisure within homes, at workplaces, and public spheres. They extend to virtually every culture and community in almost all phases of history. You can say that women is the last colony. All other colonies have won their formal freedom, but not the women. It would not be exaggeration to say that patriarchy is a bigger virus than coronavirus and masculinity is more toxic than COVID-19. If we have to find a womanly future, we have to refer back to Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi has given most powerful weapon of non-violent resistance as a matter of conflict resolution, namely Satyagraha. Satyagraha, which he upheld as a moral or ethical struggle, holding to truth force or love force or soul force. Women is reservoir of moral and ethical force, love and compassion. She can be very good at persuasion and negotiation. She is a good listener, she is a good sayer, she is a good dialoguer. Gandhi believed that women's innate qualities of sacrifice and sufferings were more suited than men to take part in non-violent struggles. The womanly qualities of which so far were considered as weakness were redefined and remolded by Gandhi as their superior virtues. Gandhi, in fact, desired universalization of these so-called womanly traits like care, compassion, and patience, which are essential ingredients of any negotiation. These traits make her better negotiator, better mediator, leader, and manager. I quote Gandhi. He says, "My contribution to great problem of women's role in society is truth and ahimsa in every walk of life. I have hugged the hope that women would be unquestioned leader and would find her place in history." Friends, I feel that Satyagraha is women-centric and a feminine tool. By Satyagraha, Kasturba, Mahatma Gandhi's wife, beloved wife, transformed this, middle-class Hindu authoritarian husband Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was an ordinary man into a Mahatma. And Gandhi himself admits that he has learned this technique from his wife, from whom he has to pursue with patience to agree to his cause. So he really learned this whole technique of satyagraha from his wife, whom he was wedded at the age of 13. And he has great impact of Kasturba on his persona. In India, when feminism searched for an indigenous model, Gandhi's principles are of great use. While Western feminism promotes feminist consciousness, Gandhian feminism had potential to go beyond gender and help in building a society where all such differences become redundant for meaningful existence of humans. Gandhi constructs a new woman who has compassion but courage, who is caring but firm. She has the moral force to protect any attempt made on her chastity and honor. He creates a woman as powerful as Kali and Durga, who by her own resolute will and conscience will fight for her future. I again quote Gandhi. Gandhi says, "Who is a woman? She is mother of men, and she forgets the suffering involved in the joy of creation. Let her transfer this love, this joy to the whole of humanity, and let her forget that she can ever be object of man's lust." Gandhi considers women as incarnation of love and ahimsa. Today, the increasing number of rapes and sexual violence in India reminds me of a principle of, celibacy, which was propounded by Mahatma Gandhi. It is the most powerful and liberating concept where conquest of lust is the highest endeavor in one's life. Gandhi says, again, I'm quoting within quote, "We should rise above our sexualities, masculinity and femininity, and work as friends and comrades for the wider interest of the society." So, because this is very, very important, as today's market is reducing women into our body. Market and media are the new tools of patriarchy, and they are deconstructing her image every day. The whole politics of beauty, fairness, slim figures is propagated by the media, and that is the only reason why violence against women and sexual violence are increasing. So Gandhi gives a totally new definition of beauty. For him, Gandhi says, again, I'm quoting, "A beautiful woman is one in whose heart God resides, whose conduct is ethical, who wears Swadeshi clothes, and who inspires men for satyagraha." So here is Gandhi brought women, not only he recreates a new woman, but he gives her such a new definition, which I find very, very important. Gandhi has worked for women, eradicating all the social evils of child marriages, dowry, widow marriages, and all. But again, a very big contribution of Gandhi is that Gandhi brought women into political forefront. He involved women into national movement. That was a turning point in women's life, when she was not only empowered, but the whole national movement changed into a mass movement. So I feel this whole concept and whole contribution of Gandhi is very, very important. And this is very instrumental in creating consciousness among academicians and activists to work on his lines, which later on we can see in the recent India how many organizations are working Gandhian lines. So not only that Gandhi's principles of Swadeshi, passive resistance, satyagraha, non-violence are women-centric, but as I said, today's India is witnessing several grassroots movements, civil society leaders, environmental leaders, and women organizations working on Gandhian postulates. These are organizations and movements which have increased visibility of women in conflict management, whether it's the Chipko movement as old as in 1970, begging trees stop deforestation. Women takes on the call and says, "I can't for more than 10 miles to collect water." Vandana Shiva talks of ecofeminism and believes that women has a special link to biodiversity and are best custodian of earth health through the knowledge of heterogeneity of life. So Women, because women respect their on diversity, sustain the family, community, and the mother nature. Women does not want to master the nature, but listens to its voices. With this introductory remarks and deliberately bringing Gandhi into the whole discourse, I welcome this really heavyweight panel who is sitting beside me, are very, very powerful voices in their reasons and working on these fields. This is a strong panel, and I really look forward for a very, very wonderful and meaningful discussion with them. As we decided in our preparatory meeting, each of us would be getting 15 minutes to give the introductory remarks, and later on we will gather questions, and maybe while answering the questions we get more time. So here now I invite one of my friend. He is from South Africa. I had the opportunity to welcome her in my own city, Betnedette Muthein. She's a poet, she's a feminist, activist, a peace scholar. Betnedette Muthein, and please, as a Gandhian disciple, please be sure that you do not take more than 15 minutes. Betnedette.
Thank you, Vidya Ji. If everybody can hear and see me, I will read from my laptop, the same one from which I'm connecting now. Is that all right? So I can begin? I'm going to touch before I start, I need to unpack a few words or concepts to ensure we're all approximately on the same page, or indeed at the very same webinar. So I'm going to ask 5 key questions, 5 questions. The one is, what is conflict? 2, what is peace and what is its antithesis, violence? 3, what is women? What is sex? What is gender? 4, segmenting society like pieces of an orange, question mark, state versus community. And 5, South Africa and Rwanda, brief examples where we look at de jure and de facto. Don't get a headache, we're going to cover everything. The first topic, what is conflict? Conflict ranges from physical and other forms of violence to a mild disagreement over resources, actions, and or meaning. Conflict is not always only negative, but can be a spark for creativity and impel transformation. For example, if you don't stop blocking my path, I will need to find a way to walk around and beyond you. I will transcend you. Differences of opinion, for example, can spark creative problem solving, but only if these expressions of difference are not harmful to anyone or the planet. Do no harm should be our fundamental agreement universally. 2, second point, what is peace and what is violence? Negative peace is generally characterized as the absence of war. Negative peace is defined in juxtaposition with an other, war, in an oppositional relationship, war versus peace. Whereas positive peace is much more than the absence of war. Positive peace is about establishing societal mechanisms that may ensure peace is lasting and war does not recur. This is where the real work of peace building, conflict resolution, mediation is done. The 2 grandfathers of peace in this regard are John Burton and after him, Johan Galtung. There are also many powerful women from Elise Boulding and our very much beloved Betty Reardon here with us today, to Wangari Maathai and many others all over the world who've spoken, written and practiced peace in powerful ways within and between states, but also on the ground, as Betty would say, within actual communities. My colleagues will speak more about these inspiring women over hundreds of years. These concepts of peace by our favorite peace gurus were previously used by, among others, Martin Luther King in his 1953 letter from a Birmingham jail, in which he wrote about negative peace, which is the absence of tension, and I'm quoting, and positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Even earlier, Jane Addams with double D, in 1907's publication, Newer Ideals of Peace, speaks to this very topic too. So to understand violence and its antithesis peace, Johan Galtung, in his groundbreaking 1996 book, Peace by Peaceful Means, conceptualized a triangulation with know, one corner or axis on top or ascendant, but each of the three corners or axes dynamic, interchangeable. Galtung spoke of, firstly, direct violence, such as physical violence. For example, a man hits a woman, and its antithesis, direct peace. No woman is hit by any man. The second axis is structural violence, where violence is embedded within the structures of society, such as gender-based violence leading to femicide or the routine murder of women and girl children. Poverty too, which causes suffering and death and marginalizes entire sections of society in favor of others. The third axis is cultural violence, with mindsets or consciousness being the biggest obstacle to peace. If a woman is raped, do we ask what she was wearing, why she was walking at night? Did she scream or fight back? In our minds, we do not draw the line that rape is always bad. Sex without consent is never okay. Sex without consent is always rape. The absence of all these violences, direct, a man hits a woman, structural, the routine murder of women and children in our societies, and cultural, the abuse of women and children through cultural attitudes that keep us all enslaved. The absence of these violences would result in peace, but a genuine, positive peace would need to account for all forms of violence, including cultural violence. This then is the embodiment of de jure peace, peace in law with theoretical peace or paper peace, and de facto peace, peace in practice, peace in reality, a lived peace, a just peace. By implication, hence, no society in which people are not entirely free, including in mindsets, are at peace, and hence no society in the world enjoys genuine positive peace. There's work yet for millennials, so please stick around. Which leads us to our next important question. Third point, what is woman, what is sex, and what is gender? Woman is conceived as the opposite of man, but a lesser version, like Eve in the Christian Bible, formed from Adam's rib, man always on top, like the never-endingly dull missionary position, with women, children, and in the Bible, slaves and animals on the pyramid towards the base. Sex is understood as nature, as science, as hormones and chromosomes, set in concrete. But we know that nature is not a line. Nature is an interdependence of far more complex equations, like a piece of string thrown in the air, taking many shapes over time, no end or beginning. So too, we have different articulations of femininity and masculinity in nature, with no human on either extreme. The South African athlete Caster Semenya and Indian athletes Santi Sundararajan and Dati Chand personify the complexities of a narrow definition of sex. Hijra in India too makes the idea of sex and gender more complex than we think of daily. Gender then is thought to be socialized. We are often involuntarily polarized into social categories of feminine and masculine, with no two ends meeting, in a dangerous hierarchical dance with masculine always supreme and feminine always subordinate, codified in religions, expressed in laws and societal mindsets and behaviors. Yet the athletes I mentioned above, Caster Semenya and Dati Chand, and in India, Hijra, show how complex sex and gender are. And then there is transgender, beyond gender. Don't stick me in your sex or gender cage kind of trance, beyond binaries. So when we conceptualize a so-called woman, we must do so in all her complexity, in a moment, and including all her intersections, socioeconomic class, age, ethnic origin, geographic location, sexuality, disability, pregnancy status, etc., past and present. The South African Constitution's Bill of Rights contains 16 categories of non-discrimination. An upper-class woman in India is different to a woman who grew up working class under apartheid like I did, is different to a girl in Palestine under Israeli occupation, or a person in Sahrawi annexed by Morocco. All over the world, women who do not conform to a narrow definition of their society's understanding of feminine are brutally attacked and sometimes murdered, indeed are often murdered in my country, in India and elsewhere, which definitely is not peace. By this definition, no country can claim to be at peace. Number four, segmenting society like pieces of an orange, ? State versus community. Peace has never been only negative peace, the absence of war, because war, so-called war, as a concept, has never only meant one entity waging war against another entity. In modern political science, we speak of states as a polity that maintains a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, in the sense of Max Weber, with so-called legitimate in quotation marks, because who defines legitimate for and by and against who? So we speak of war between states, interstate conflict, for example, World War I and World War II. However, conflicts, especially in the past 100 years, occur within states and between entities across geographic borders as an intrastate conflict and conflicts beyond states, such as the wars against the Islamic State and its many less defined elements, such as Al-Shabaab, across the world, including in my own South Africa. Transnational corporations perpetrate depredations against local people and influence states such as Nigeria to execute the writer and environmental activist Ken Saro-Wiwa in 1995, when he was at the same age I am now. Gang warfare on the Cape Flats near where I live, fueled by corrupt police who sell firearms to gang leaders, is called a war, and its tendrils stretch into local and international organized crime, from cigarettes and illicit drug smuggling to human and sex trafficking to buying of politicians, local and international. This is war. This is conflict. This is an absence of peace within a community that reaches far across one state into many parts of the world in a gangrenous interdependence, cannibalizing the poor, waging war on girls and women's bodies. So, unlike a citrus fruit, such as an orange or a lemon, where each segment is neatly enfolded in a veil separate from the other segments, making up a whole fruit, the world and conflicts are not so neatly segmented. But even the apparent citrus segments are illusory because each segment contains many juicy vesicles, and when the fruit is ripe, the vesicles burst through between the segments. Such is life, conflict, and peace. It cannot be contained in a small segment. It bursts through and spills juice everywhere. Thus, we need to rethink how we separate different levels of governance from each other, the international from the continental or regional, from the national, from the local, because all these levels are of necessity interdependent. The local informs the national and the international, and so on. States cannot legislate or enact policies without attention to international law and the needs of communities. Communities must inform legislation and policy, whether national, regional, or international. Hence, it is an oversight to focus only narrowly on the international realm, such as the United Nations and/or the nation state, ignoring all the other important actors transcending these narrow categories, including transnational corporations, international organized criminal networks, and communities of people that are local and that may transcend the local and even state boundaries, such as the Rohingya, people across Bangladesh and Burma, aka Myanmar. This is why the South African government and parliament, for example, engage in stakeholder consultations throughout its various legislative, policy, and implementation processes, which may include meetings in community halls, on the streets, and in ordinary homes. Who then makes the peace, we ask? Governments and its representatives who win Nobel Peace and other prizes, along with fat salaries and other benefits? Or is it ordinary women on the Cape Flats, dodging gangster bullets, eking subsistence, women mediating between the army supposed to combat gangsterism but sometimes abusing residents, between deadly gangs who are in economic and power struggles variously, between extractive religious leaders who care only about enriching themselves rather than supporting the community. Communities dealing with a pandemic like COVID-19, combat poverty, inequality, and unemployment, hard struggles. These, as Betty Reardon has pointed out, are our everyday sheroes and heroes, our ordinary peacemakers, these women struggling for survival among so much unspeakable violence. It is they who deserve the accolades, the salaries and benefits, the peace prizes and cash, the support and celebration. For it is these usually unsung women who comprise the state, who comprise the international, who populate the planet, who need us the most. 5 are 5 points. South Africa and Rwanda, de jure and de facto. After apartheid, South Africa enacted a powerful constitution with its Bill of Rights ensuring non-discrimination on an unprecedented intersecting 16 grounds, 1-6. Yet women and children are routinely raped and murdered here. Rwanda, after the 1994 genocide, ensured one of the world's highest representativities of women in the legislature and executive. Yet cultural violence and gender discrimination persists even there. So despite these ostensible paper rights and the apparent window dressing of women present in large numbers at all levels of society, these countries show that unless we establish mechanisms to ensure gender equity in fact and practice, we have not stemmed conflict and effected positive peace. We remain at war on one half of society, men, against the other half of the world, women. In conclusion, and in conclusion is spelt one word. When violence is perpetrated, not only the victim of violence suffers, the perpetrator is brutalized before committing violence and through their very acts of violence. Witnesses to the violence also suffer vicarious trauma. So all of society suffers when violence is perpetrated. No one is immune from violence. Yet everyone benefits from peace, as everyone, even racists, have benefited from the end of apartheid. People benefit from the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, etc. People benefit, whether they like it or not, they benefit. So everyone should be invested in ending all forms of violence, including cultural violence, to effect a lasting, just, positive peace for all the world's people and the planet we inhabit, with respect and without doing harm. President Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso once said, "We do not talk of women's emancipation as an act of charity or because of a surge of human compassion. It is a basic necessity for the triumph of the revolution. Women hold up half the sky." And let me repeat the last sentence. Women hold up half the sky. Namaste. Thank you.
So let's look at very the whole
Vidya Ji, we can't hear you. Ma'am, we can't hear you. Vidya Ji, we can't hear you. Can't hear you, Vidya Ji.
Can you?
Yeah, ma'am, we can't hear you.
And Veda, we can't see your face either. That's better, Veda.
Yeah. No, but we can't hear Vidya ma'am at all. So, in fact, I think there is some connectivity issue with Vidya ma'am. May I request Janet ma'am, Professor Janet Gerson? No, we had our prior meeting, so it was to be Professor Matt Meyer. Yes. Sorry. So, yes, sir. Please, the platform is all yours, sir.
Yeah. If you can hear me, you can just wave or give me thumbs up. Oh, it's good to see you waving. That's excellent.
Can you hear me?
Vidya ma'am, we can hear you now. You can briefly introduce me, but please make it brief, if you wish.
Okay, without taking any time, I'm going to on second, post it.
Ma'am, we can't hear you.
Activist and an academician. Again, I welcome you in Jaipur. We have Gandhi
Sir, please go ahead, Matt, sir, because Vidya
Okay.
ma'am is completely on and we can't hear her.
Okay, good day. I'll just start by saying there is no way to give a talk to this august group of organizations and set of global participants, nor to this esteemed group of colleagues who I'm privileged to be able to call my sisters, without feeling a little bit out of place based on my gender. It's not that men or cis male people, as is now being stated, cannot or should not talk about the roles of women in conflict resolution. However, as we continue to see too liberal a framework for and from those who have historically already taken up more than our share of academic and oratory space. Thus, I titled this talk, Women in Conflict Resolution, A View from the Invisibilizers. I titled it this, aware in radical terms of the space and perspectives which must be properly interrogated, such that we all become sharper about how to truly increase visibility in more than simply a tokenistic manner. So, let me begin with a quote from Gandhi about the nature of conflict and peace itself. Activism, Gandhi said, is working at grassroots. It trains one in democracy to consult, to value opinions of the people, not to have a judgment, not to make up your mind in drawing room or something else. To go out to the community and experience what the community is experiencing, to work with them, to listen to what they are saying. That is the one way we can really make a difference to empower communities and educate them. The quote continues, we need to make them powerful so that they can come out and say, the people shall govern. We have to make it possible for the people to govern, and until that happens, somebody else is going to govern them. I would rather look to a small organization that can make a difference to a life at the grassroots level, empowerment programs that can provide skills training and much greater opportunities for women. Close quote. Now, some scholars might suggest that the wording and phrasing sounds too modern, or that they've never heard those words in the text of Mohandas Gandhi. They would, in this case, be correct, because the quote comes not from Mohandas Gandhi, but instead from another important Gandhi, the contemporary South African leader, Ela Gandhi, granddaughter of Mohandas, but much more than that, former African National Congress member of parliament, and the leader of many academic and activist pursuits. The empowerment program which she cited were ones she continues to develop. And of course, the phrase, the people shall govern, comes out of the long history of African liberation movements. So as we move, seeming these days at times like we're moving faster than ever to a world where people-centered participatory democracy is an urgent demand of grassroots resistance movements everywhere. It is especially an honor to serve as Secretary General of the International Peace Research Association and to be able as such to loudly proclaim all the research, all the scientific evidence accumulated especially over the last decades points to the clear and simple fact that women peace builders engaged at all levels of conflict resolution, negotiation, mediation, and building alternative institutions and constructive programs are absolutely essential to the success of that work. The science, by the way, also shows that the opposite is true. The invisibility, exclusion, or even limitation of women in these processes invariably and inevitably leads to their failure. Now, the speakers that have preceded me and those that are going to follow are going to give some more, I think, scientific examples of the research work that they've done. But I've been asked to give several examples, which I'll do and conclude talking a little bit about men. I think in some ways, one of the most important and also underrepresented examples is one that played out on one of the largest stages, that of the United Nations. We hear about the Mozambican leader Graça Machel, who is, I think, most thought of by the majority of people as President Nelson Mandela's wife. Sometimes people think, but she was also the wife of the former president of Mozambique, Samora Machel. But of course, Graça Machel's extraordinary contributions are and were as Minister of Education of her own post-independence Mozambique, and as in some ways the key mobilizer of a global consciousness around the right of children and youth to not be conscripted, to not be engaged, to not be forced into armed conflict. So looking at women, and of course looking at women and children and youth, has been a center point of Graça's, and from her leadership, the UN's new look at conflict and violence and war. I'm going to run now quickly through a bunch of other names, and the fact of the matter is we'll have a text and we'll have citations. It's part of being an academic, and part of being an academic at home, where you just get to be in my room, where I can just pull books off the shelves and show them. So I'll show them quickly, and if you can't get them, we'll give you the resources. But it's important to note some of the cutting-edge struggles and women at the leadership of them. I want to spotlight Ana Garcia, whose intellectual work on BRICS, the new sub-imperialist, sub-regional Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are in fact vying to become the new regional superpowers that will just formate a new level of oppression. It's important to note some of the work of indigenous women and women leaders in Mexico, the Zapatistas and others, and that in fact they ran a woman, Maria de Jesus Patricio Martinez, for president in the past years with the explicit intent to not win. The vision was to spotlight women's leadership, to spotlight indigenous leadership, and to stay as grassroots resistors as part of the general Mexican movement. It's important to me in this forum to note the women in the occupied nation of Kashmir, some of whom have only recently become spokespeople as their partners were jailed or killed. And as we're looking at occupied territories and a new cutting-edge network developing of people from occupied territories sharing resources and stories, the women of occupied West Papua and Western Sahara are leading new generations of new movements, looking at the connections between means and ends, advocating tactics of civil resistance in the face of structural, institutional, interpersonal, and all forms of violence. I want to call out my friend Silvia Federici of Italy, whose critical work on unwaged women's labor in general continues to propagate a new look at injustice and liberation in every society. Looking at history, especially as someone from the US, I cannot help but cite the foundational role of the feminist Barbara Deming. Barbara Deming wrote an essay on revolution and equilibrium, where she engaged directly with the psychiatrist, revolutionary advocate Frantz Fanon by looking at a revolutionary nonviolence that was and still is at a very beginning stage, a stage that Barbara Deming talked about being experimental and almost infantile in nature, going well beyond what M.K. Gandhi wrote, towards a still unrealized total revolution. And I have to, of course, note IPRA's own Elise Boulding, Betty Reardon, and many others who, amongst many, many other contributions, reminded us and taught me that our job as peace researchers and activists is not just, or maybe even primarily, to resolve conflict, but rather to foment creative conflict, especially for the empowerment of young women and for an end to the war against the earth known as the climate crisis. I want to say, as I think about my fellow panelists, that some of these stories are told in the book that Vidya Jain and I co-edited on connecting contemporary African Asian peace building and nonviolence. And I have to shout out two other women from the US, Mandy Carter and Elizabeth Batista Martinez, who with me edited this book, where in it we had the work of a gentleman named John Stoltenberg. And the reason I note his name and this book is that in our looks at moving past the white supremacy, the male supremacy, the injustices of this current society, at a world where men can begin to refuse to be a man, where we can call for a conceptual end of manhood, not that we wouldn't have men, but that the ideological institution propagating patriarchy, that being a man and male supremacy, which enables the continued invisibility of women, has got to end forever. It is not just calling out to become better allies. That's part of it. It's also to understand that refusing to be a man means getting much more comfortable with being uncomfortable. We must become comfortable with the discomfort of not being the spokespeople so much, of not being in charge of the money so much, of not being in charge of the agenda so much. We must refuse to be a man in all of those traditional ways that manhood has and continues to be defined. So I want to end this talk now by calling out two final names. One that I would guess hardly any or none of you have heard. I hadn't heard of them 3 days ago. I want to call out the names of Dominique Remy Fells of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Riaha Milton of Liberty Township, Ohio. These are two Black trans women who have been killed in just the past 48 hours in the US, as the US continues to be racked with mutually reinforcing pandemics of COVID-19, militarized police violence, and the economic collapse of an empire in deep decline. New movements, such as People's Strike, General Strike 2020, are rising up here in the US, and new movements and new initiatives globally, which you'll hear about in a few moments. But we must globally call the names of these and many, many other women to push towards visibility and also to actual people's power for urgent, positive, social, political, economic, and environmental change. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Vidya ma'am is there. Vidya ma'am. Well.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mayor. I'm really happy to recognize the contribution of many years to talk about their contribution, especially due to you, because when you talk about the manhood, you challenge this manhood, we really need balance to this, to the egalitarian, the completely men who work
Vidya ma'am, we can't hear you. You are not audible.
Unmute me. Hear me now. What's wrong? Hello.
Ma'am, please be more. We can't hear you. Please
Why
be
you
louder.
can't hear me?
Yeah, voice. Please speak louder.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me now? So much, and I invite on the channel who's Janet, education of reality and the privilege to be with them on different chapters, like we were expressed together for the IIT meeting. Janet, you are more.
Shall I go? Yes?
Yes, Janet ma'am, please start.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, you are distinctly
good.
audible.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I am so grateful to be with you, to be a part of this meeting. I'm so grateful to the Gandhi organizers, to Veda, to Vidya, and the rest of this group, to be with my esteemed colleagues here. And can you hear me? Yes, okay.
Yes, Janet, I can hear you.
Thank you. I welcome all of you participants. And I think someone should be muted who's where the sound is yes, is it better now? Yes. Okay. I invite all of you, every one of you who is here, to join our panel and become and participate as a nonviolent peace builder, and to join the community of global civil society peace builders, of which everyone in the panel, these ideas don't come out of the air or one genius's, one hero or Shiro's mind, but for decades we have been working together, building on the work which our esteemed panelists have mentioned already, building on the work of others. So I'm going to speak about 3 levels of communication and social movement action. The second wave feminist movement in New York, in the United States, because I'm back from that old thing that happened a while ago, from learning about conflict resolution, which you also have, many of you are experiencing, learning, teaching, and using. And then on the international level and global civil society level, of which I work closely with and was mentored, and grateful to have been mentored by Dr. Betty Reardon, and work with many fine people who I will not go into too many names. Matt did a good job for all of us on that. Okay, so the second wave feminism in the United States, the motto was, in a sense, the personal is political. And the method or mode was that I want to emphasize. Of course, it's not the only one. This is an overly simplistic representation, so you couldn't follow it, absorb it, and put it to use. Was small groups, small consciousness raising groups that anyone could participate in, that you could form in your neighborhood, or from the mothers at the school, or it could be intergenerational. And that way women could talk together about our problems, and our problems in particular with the roles and rules that apply to us. I myself was raised to be a good wife, and even getting educated or trained on how to be beautiful and graceful. I was a dancer and a choreographer, but really the patriarchal perspective on that was that I would be a very beautiful and graceful wife. And what was a wife? A property of a man, something to build the wealth and the well-being of the man and to serve the man and the family. So together, we women, we thousands and thousands of women actually disrupted this view by working together, by helping each other in communication, in conversation. We could talk about our feelings, our thoughts, and we could strategize for actions, and we could support each other in those actions. And in that way, we opened up the place for women in many, many dimensions. Not all, of course. We didn't make everything go away, but we practiced dialogue, and we practiced community building, and we practiced thinking together and learning from and with each other in relation to challenging the problems that we were facing. Okay, the second level or mode is conflict resolution. And my little motto for that is, he who hits first has run out of ideas. Anyone can understand this proverb, and anyone can hold it in mind. In a sense, conflict resolution was based on the idea, how can we be nonviolent and work out problems without dominating, yelling, pounding, eliminating the other person's view? How can we, I would say conflict resolution is a practice of rewriting the story of a conflict, to reframe one person or one group or one community against another, me against you, or him against her. We reframe the story through discussion and dialogue and opening listening and identifying what we have in common and how we're interconnected. We rewrite the story to reframe the conflict as a problem we have together, that we together can bring our resourcefulness, our limits, and our capacities to challenge and address a problem. So from a conundrum, from an irreconcilable and violent block, to something where we back up, open the story, include many more parts, and rewrite as a common, unified, but diverse segments of an orange, rewriting the story. Okay, so conflict resolution, it can be between people, it can be between groups or communities, or it can have mediation. Mediation means a third party, so-called neutral, an outside party, someone not in the conflict, helps people to listen and reframe and reflect, to move to a new level of thinking and another story. Okay, and the third level is the international or the global level. Many people reduce what happens in the world, in the power relations of the world, to nation states. And even the United Nations was formed as a member state organization. But many people like Betty, all of our panel has been very active in challenging the idea that only governments can speak. And that has included, for example, well, I want to say that the UN was built institutionally from the beginning with what was called the Conference or Convention on the Status of Women. And this body has met every year and has sponsored international forums where people talk to each other and exchange, and our eyes are so open to learning from one another. And because the UN had the principle of human rights, the women's movement, the women activists argued and discussed and promoted the idea, the slogan of women's rights are human rights. But many people in countries said, we don't relate to that. Our concern is violence against women. And so in learning from each other, there was a reframe to, we are here to eliminate violence against women. And that led to an international convention or treaty called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And that became a tool which all of you should know about. It sounds like a piece of paper or something way out there, out of our everyday reach. But women all over the world have made this a document of their own. The city of San Francisco made it a document, a law influencing policy of the city of San Francisco. Okay, so there were 4 international women's forums where the ideas and the power of women was built up. And through this, another reframe took place because the UN was dominated by military powers. And their idea of peace building may include military means, but not inclusion of all citizens, and especially not women. And this led to, through Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and many activists like Cora Weiss and the Hague Appeal for Peace, it led to an unprecedented opening in the door of the Security Council, where the NGO community was able to lobby for, can you see my little pin? For Security Resolution 1325. And Security Resolution 1325 became another of these documents in which the call was for, or the new norm was to include women in peace building at all levels. Now, this is still a very big challenge, as you may know from your experience. These are not battles that are simply won. These are not conflicts that are simply resolved, but they're ongoing struggles that take constant vigilance. They take the skills of community building, of dialogue, negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution, and at the UN level, the global, international, or global civil society level, they take deliberation. Deliberation is using all those skills for policy negotiation, policy formulation, and decision-making and strategy organizing to move forward. So I invite you all to think how you can participate yourself in your communities with the groups you're related to, and make a leap into the larger scale which challenges us all. Now we need a global community, interdependent and interconnected, to deal with climate crisis. We need the whole world to deal with this pandemic and to deal with the basic issues of women's empowerment and nonviolence and building peace that have haunted us. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful. thanking all for the solidarity work. Thank you so much, Janet. Now we have the last speaker, last but not the least. She is youngest of us all, Dr. Dinah Lakehal, working with Global Network of Women Peace Builders. I really look forward to hear about her work. She is doing true, action-related work. Dr. Dinah.
Can I just interject? Sorry, Dinah, just a minute. There are people whose mics are not muted. It's very distracting for the presenter and for the participants. Please mute your mic, including Rajdeep Patak. Please mute your mic. Thank you. Sorry, Dinah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vidya Jain. Thank you to the, can everyone hear me? Sound check? Great. Thank you to the organizers of this event and to all those who tuned in on a Saturday. Some of you, I know it's late at night, depending on where you are in the world. So thank you for tuning in to listen to the discussion. I'll also say that I hope that there are some young people in the audience, because young people are the strongest driving force of change, not of tomorrow, but of today. And we're seeing this right here where I am in New York, on the streets of New York, but also everywhere in the world, from Hong Kong to Algeria. So my name is Dinah Lakehal. I am representing the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, which is an international coalition of more than 100 women's rights organizations and civil society from over 40 different countries who are experiencing conflict or humanitarian crises. We work to build equal, resilient, and peaceful communities, and we work with the UN, with governments, and with other international organizations to bridge the gap between global policies, which Dr. Janet Gerson has elaborated on, CEDAW, 1325, and all of these different international frameworks. So we bridged the gap between these global policies and then local action on the ground. So the UN this year is celebrating its 75th anniversary. So 75 years ago, the UN was tasked with promoting international peace and security along with human rights and development. But it was only 20 years ago, within all of our lifetimes, after the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women and peace and security, that it was formally recognized that women experienced war and conflict differently, that conflict had an inordinate impact on women, on young women, and on girls, that it exacerbated gender inequalities across the board and in every way possible by excluding and marginalizing women socially, politically, economically, culturally. That sexual violence, rape, was used as a tool of war, that there were higher rates of illiteracy for women and girls, increases in forced and child marriages, that there are overrepresentations of women and girls in refugee and international and internally displaced populations, to name a few of the outsized impacts of conflict that women face. My point is, women experience war in a different way, and in order to end and prevent war from happening again, we can't ignore their experiences. And so with now 10 resolutions, the UN Security Council agenda on women and peace and security is one of the strongest normative frameworks on women's agency and leadership in building peace and preventing conflict. But while the Security Council is the body that adopted 1325, it was actually a product of women-led civil society organizations who have been championing this long before the Security Council adopted it on paper. And while the Security Council sits in the comfortable chairs and chambers, it's really grassroots women's rights organizations and civil society who are breathing life into these WPS, Women, Peace and Security resolutions. It's local women who are translating the resolutions into necessary actions on the ground, who are using them as instruments to demand participation and leadership and decision-making and conflict prevention and peace building, so that future generations will not experience the war and conflict and inequality that they themselves experienced. But the work of grassroots women's rights organizations and peace-building organizations is not sufficiently recognized or supported by governments, by international organizations, including the UN, by the media, and I will venture to say that sometimes even by academics. we now have more and more evidence of the link between gender inequality and conflict. Gender inequality is one of the key drivers of conflict, and at the same time, gender equality is a key driving force of peace. We have overwhelming empirical evidence that women's participation in peace processes have a positive impact on peace and security and on the durability of peace agreements. Sustainable peace has to be inclusive and reflect the needs and priorities and realities of the diversity of our communities. It cannot just be a bunch of old white men at the negotiation table. And women, youth, persons with disabilities, refugees, stateless persons, ethnic minorities, rural communities, LGBTQI people, all other marginalized groups should lead the process, in fact. And when women meaningfully participate, when their processes or when their perspectives and their experiences are reflected in peace agreements and peace processes, the likelihood of sustaining the peace agreement increases by 35%. That means that excluding women directly undermines peace. And women must be included at all stages of peace and security throughout the monitoring of agreements, the implementation, the negotiations, throughout all of the different stages. So since one of the objectives of this discussion is to discuss the significance of engendering peace processes, I want to touch on what it means for women to meaningfully participate. So how do we define meaningful participation? I think it's important that we look beyond just numbers and the physical presence of women in the room. And instead, we have to define meaningful participation as direct, substantive, and formal inclusion of diverse women in positions of power that can influence the outcome of negotiations and other processes, as well as their implementation. But enabling meaningful participation requires valuing and legitimizing the work of diverse women and creating and safeguarding the opportunities for them to speak for themselves rather than to be spoken for. Consultations without the opportunity to influence the outcome of discussions are not meaningful, and women must be given the opportunity to set and shape agendas and experience the tangible benefits of their engagement. Meaningful participation also has to be systematic, it has to be timely, it has to be transparent, and like I mentioned before, it can't be limited to just the peace negotiations, but must extend to the entire process, from the monitoring to the political processes to constitution building and economic development as well. One example of a peace agreement with very strong gender provisions is Colombia. Along with the Philippines and South Sudan as well. But I'll go over Colombia very quickly before making a comparison, if you will, with peace processes in the Middle East region, which is my regional focus of work. So my team at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, in partnership with the NYU Center for Global Affairs, led a research to examine gender-sensitive provisions in peace agreements and women's political and economic inclusion post-conflict. And we had a few key findings. The first key finding, I've already mentioned, that including women in peace negotiations increases the likelihood of gender provisions in the final agreement by more than 35%. Using Colombia's peace agreement as an example, which I believe is the world's most gender-sensitive peace agreement, in Colombia, where the women's movement is strong and women's participation in negotiations were high, the peace agreement included hundreds of gender-sensitive provisions, from the particular ways in which women and the LGBTQI communities were affected to gender-specific disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration considerations, to land rights. It's really one of the strongest on paper. But another key finding was that quotas were a better predictor of improved outcomes for women's post-conflict political representation than our gender provisions. That means that provisions that are very concrete and actionable in nature are more likely to be implemented or to be held accountable for non-implementation. So how do we support women's meaningful participation in peace negotiations and broader processes when they face such high marginalization and exclusion? Supporting and facilitating informal, so track 2 peace talks and related processes, and ensuring that women and other persons involved in their implementation to have access to track 1 negotiation spaces are one ways of ensuring representative engagement of women in peace agreements. So my team at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, in partnership with our local partners, we we support track 2 initiatives that address root causes of violence perpetrated by party conflicts. So for example, by organizing inter-ethnic community dialogues, by raising awareness about the provisions of existing peace agreements in local communities, by providing livelihood opportunities to vulnerable groups and supporting leadership and education of young women, and by facilitating these processes and also facilitating track 1.5 processes, so meetings and consultations that bring together local women with government officials and official negotiators, we're able to create spaces for meaningful engagement. Now let's travel a little bit over to the Middle East, which is a region that remains particularly volatile, and peace and security issues are at the forefront of a lot of the MENA states' agendas. And things like occupation, political crisis, and climate change are further exacerbating violence and displacement. The ongoing conflicts in the Middle East have impacted women and girls in specific and complex ways, and their rights have been severely impeded by violence and insecurity. But they're not passive victims. Women's organizations and women activists have organized across the region to demand their inclusion in peace talks and conflict resolutions, in national dialogues, in post-conflict recovery, etc. In Syria and Yemen, the mechanisms that are meant to support the meaningful participation of women activists and women's organization in political and peace processes have frankly been ineffective. Women have been largely absent from dialogue and from decision making. There have been women's advisory boards that have been created and led by the UN and member states, which are surprisingly looked at as a success. But in the way that we define meaningful participation, which has less to do with the number of women, but more with the ability to shape the outcome, women's advisory boards are only a success at literally marginalizing women into a separate body whose role is only to consult rather than to decide. So women's organizations and women activists, women human rights defenders in the Middle East are actively working in their communities and with their communities and demanding their inclusion in peace talks. In Yemen, women's groups did not wait for an invitation to participate in the peace talks. They organized a delegation of 16 women and they traveled to Riyadh to claim their space. They're very active and are creating actual change on the ground, but they need more support and more visibility and more funding and more opportunities to make their voice heard. And I'll end by saying that we have to put an end to our traditional way of thinking of and model of peacemaking, which really limits participation to gun holders. And by doing so, reinforces patriarchal structures and inequalities that have led to the conflict in the first place. And to achieve sustainable peace, we have to open up the table to other groups, especially women's groups, who are there to lead the process and who are extremely qualified to lead the process. Thank you.
Vidya, unmute your mic. Very good. That was amazing, Dinah.
So I feel that it was, wonderful presentation, and there must be many observations, queries, questions. So, Reza, have you collected the questions for the speaker?
Yes. So let me start with, ma'am, let me start with the first question from Jyoti Singh, and I think it is for Dinah. How can we create this global community for women empowerment and peace building throughout the world, keeping in mind the level of subordination and discrimination in different parts of the world? Probably she's trying to ask in the context of, the global network for women peace builders. So I would request Dinah to kindly respond to that.
I'm sorry, it broke off for me, so I didn't hear. Would you be able to type the question in the chat so I can read it, or repeat the question?
The question's already in the chat, Dinah.
Oh, let me check now.
Have a look. Jyoti Singh at 1825. I think Professor Betty Reardon can also contribute to the conversation whenever she likes.
And I'd also like to say I should have acknowledged Dr. Betty Reardon as one of our esteemed members of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders International Advisory Council, and someone I personally look up to very fondly. And yes, so but Dr. Reardon, if you would like to speak, the floor is yours.
Yeah, definitely we would love to hear from Professor Reardon. That would be really an honor.
Veda, can you please write the question in the chat?
Yeah, I will read it.
I think I took myself out.
No, Betty, we can hear you and see you, so just give us your comments. You're great.
Okay, well, I don't have a lot to say, but there are a couple of things that come to mind. And one is that I really rejoice that IPRA is doing this, because one of the first grounds of struggle was within the Peaceful Search movement, which, like all institutions, was infected with patriarchy. So I'm very happy that I have come to this stage of life, or have lasted long enough to have the experience of IPRA organizing this conversation. The other thing is, it is wonderful to see the depth and variety of positions and the richness of substance that is brought into the issue, as well as the potential for specific practical action, particularly that made possible by 1325. And as someone quite far, anyway, two years now into a 10th decade, I must say that the views are changing as to who's looking up to whom. Because I look up with very great hope to the young women who are doing the work of 1325, to the young women who are in our streets during these past weeks, and to the young women who brought the climate crisis to the conscience of the whole world. So it's a great time to be this age and to be with you. Thank you.
If I may say something briefly now, because I don't want to say much, but very briefly, because in some ways, if I contribute anything of use, it's connecting organizations. And in addition to saying and recognizing on the screen some dear comrades from the International Fellowship of Reconciliation and War Resistance International, the other behind the scenes thing for people to know between Janet's organization and Dinah's organization and IPRA is that there's a thread that runs through them, and that thread is named Betty Reardon. Because Betty really played and plays such a foundational role in each of those. It's my honor, it's our honor to have IPRA back to a place that was rooted in the kind of thinking that you and Elise and others were trying to push, even against some of those men back in the days. And I guess I want to just end by saying this, because we have a long way to go. So it's IPRA's honor and pleasure to be here. But for those of you that thinks that this program is wrapping up, and we are wrapping up in some ways, I want to say that in addition to the honor of being with the collegial organizations, IEPE and Women's Peace Builders, there's also a very, I won't say very, but a young woman who is part of IPRA, who is part of the Asian Pacific Peace Research Association, who is here with us as a special surprise. So if you just wait, and I see her smiling now, so if you just wait, we're going to close this program with an extraordinary piece of poetry from a young Pakistani woman who I won't introduce. But don't go just yet, because in addition to some Q&A we'll have now, and I am going to back off a little bit and shut up as enough male voices, we'll have some Q&A, but stay till the very end, those who can, because you're going to hear an extraordinary poem from one of IPRA's younger and most dynamic young women leaders.
I would like to add one sentence clarification for the question, because the women and peace building, women, peace and security is an NGO, an international NGO that works with local partners. So it is literally an organization that can be joined or connected to. Thank you.
Yeah, there is a question for Dinah. There is a question for Dinah, please. This is a question from Jayashree. For Dinah, do you really think cultural conditioning is also plays an important role in making women stronger? This is a question directed to Dinah.
Yes, I think that cultural norms are strongly patriarchal and are obstacles to women and the empowerment of women, and that our culture often reflects what we prioritize. And I know that sometimes our governments or our leaders aren't necessarily representative of the culture that we identify with, but when we prioritize militarism, when we prioritize militarism, then we're not promoting a mindset that is that creates space for peace builders, for women peace builders to participate. And even in most countries around the world, we have strong laws for gender equality, for women's empowerment, for youth empowerment. The problem is they're not being implemented because we're not prioritizing them. We're prioritizing militarism, for example. So I do think that cultural conditioning is very important. And unfortunately, a lot of our cultures, including my own, tend to be strongly, deeply patriarchal.
And thank you, Dinah. I think, if I may say, Veda, Magda Zenon in Cyprus would like to contribute, please.
Yes. That's what exactly I was trying to get, Madam Magda Zenon. Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Veda.
Is she there?
Hi, I'm Magda Zenon from Cyprus. I belong to two regional women-mediated networks, as well as the Global Alliance. And I think this move to create these regional networks is a form or a format that we can connect both the local to the global, and in turn also promote women peace builders. So I think all the networks, because I know the network that Dinah works with, there are networks in South Africa called the Gerson Shop as well. So we have to find a way to connect all the regional networks, because in that way we share resources, we amplify each other's voices, and we also possibly, because we become stronger, we can collect the local to the global. We can collect the communal to the local to the global. So I think we've got to work at different levels of, I have so much admiration for the women in Africa, being a child of Africa, but living in Europe now, so much admiration for the women of Africa that do incredible work at a communal level. Work that is so precious and yet never goes up. So if we can find a way to use the regional networks, because the regional networks are all made up of different levels of women, okay? Community, national, global, international. So I think we've got to really work at connecting the dots. I think there are a few scattered dots around, and I think we've got to find a way to connect the dots, that each of us is not reinventing the wheel. Because there is so much that is being said, there's so much that is so important, but we've got to find a way to not waste
our energy even more, to ensure that our energy is used more efficiently. Because especially with the COVID virus, I think we all so deflated, not deflated, overstretched. So I think if we could find a way to slowly connect the dots, and in this way bring out the communal work that to me is so much more important than the work at the negotiating table, in all types of conflict. The main conversation has no value if the voices at the bottom are not heard. That's me. So, and if anyone wants help in connecting, I'm a good connector. I'm a good connector.
Thank you, Magda.
Okay.
Thank you, Magda. Veda and Vidya, your mics are muted if you want to continue to facilitate.
Yeah. So in fact, before I request my close friend Rumana I would request to give a final comment to Madam Vidya Jain. Madam Vidya Jain, please your final comments before I introduce Rumana to the platform for the closing. Madam Vidya Jain, your final comments. Nothing is audible.
For very small mediators and negotiators and peace processes, but very much in the big and ensure negotiations can succeed and last long. There is a strong evidence that whenever limits come together, they bring a change. So our present, the highest level of decision making is also not to bring out the change. So without taking much time now and back already use this pleasant surprise to us, I call upon this beautiful, young, smart, energetic poetess and a personality scholar with just all the beautiful poet. Rumana.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, Rumana, just 1 second, Rumana, before you speak, let me introduce you to the platform. This poem which Rumana is going to recite, probably I don't know whether she remembers or not, she had written when she was in school. I have known her since her school days. And in 2013, on the eve of the International Day of Non-Violence, October 2nd, the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. And this poem was a tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela. And it's a very powerful poem. In fact, she's a brilliant poem, and I remember because there are participants from Africa also in this group. Many of us remember that whole thing where so many girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram. Rumana penned a very powerful poem which was carried by some of the leading African websites. So, in fact, I've known Rumana, as I told you, since her school days, and now she's doing a master's degree from UK. So, Rumana, without wasting any time, the closing is all yours with this powerful poem as a tribute to the apostles of peace, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Martin Luther King. It's over to you, Rumana.
Can you all hear me?
Yes,
perfectly. Thank you.
You're perfect. Hi, Dr. Vidya. Hi, Professor Matt. It's so good to see you again. Thank you, Veda Vyasankar, for the wonderful introduction. I do want to take a second to acknowledge that my parents are currently in this video call. So I just want to say hi to them and thank them for their support. So I did not remember that I wrote this in 2013, but it's called A Positive Power. And here it is. There is anger in me. There is thirst for revenge. There is desire to kill, but there is also a wish for peace. There is a yearning to end war without shedding blood. There is a passion to save lives without losing any. There is a dream to start life anew with tales of forgiveness and with the lure of happiness. Throw a rock at me and I won't hit you back. I will give you a second chance to redeem yourself. For I have embarked on a journey, the journey of Gandhi, the voyage of Mandela. I seek to forgive and hope to forget. Come to me, not with weapons, but with a sinful heart, which we will together cleanse of all filth. Your body is as pure as mine. Every drop of blood is sacred. No heart is meant to be broken, for all our hearts beat in the same rhythm. There is no place for hate. There is no place for vengeance. There is no place to lose humanity. But there is still some place to find yourself. So today, I call out to all the killers who perpetrated genocides. Today, I call out to all the potential killers who might kill me for what I have to say. Today, I call out to all scholars of nonviolence who saw Mandela in prison for 27 years, who saw Gandhi give up his life for his principles, who saw Martin Luther King's dream through their own eyes, who stood with Rosa Parks when she refused to stand up. Let's come together to create power, a positive force, a healing potion, a spell with the blessings of nonviolence. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yay.
That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. From one poet to another, gorgeous, absolute gorgeous. Vidya Ji, Veda. Can't
How is
hear
it
you.
possible that we've ended 8 minutes, 7 minutes early? I don't think that's ever happened before.
Veda, your mic is muted. I can't hear you, Veda.
Yeah,
Vidya.
we can't hear you, but it doesn't matter. We can feel your presence. Janet is blowing kisses to people, and Bernadette is trying to keep everyone on technological track. But
Thanks, Matt Meyer.
So anybody wants to say something, or we end up the meeting? Bernadette, you want to say something?
Cabrera. Yes, please, Vidya Ji. Victoria Cabrera would like to say something. Where are you, Victoria Cabrera?
Okay.
I think it's
Hi. Yeah,
this
is
Victoria.
I go by Mavic. I don't know why my email appeared like that. Thank you all for the very powerful presentations, and thank you to the organizers. I just would like to reinforce Magda and Matt's points about the need for us to coordinate our work, share information. One of our colleagues said that they work with a lot of organizers, but often they don't have the opportunity to participate in global policy and decision-making processes. That's one of the work that our organization, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, does, and I've shared my email and Dina's email. So please be in touch with us. And as Magda said, we have great connect, and Matt said we have great connectors in this conversation. Would be happy to work with all of you. And last but not the least, special birthday greetings and thank you to our member of the GNWP International Advisory Council, reinforcing Dina's acknowledgement, Dr. Betty Reardon. Hello, everyone, and stay safe and well wherever you are quarantining. Thank you so much. Looking forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you, Victoria. Veda, can I ask about the evaluation form? People keep asking for a feedback form. Can you speak to that, Veda?
Yeah. Actually, as we have been saying that we are requesting everyone to share in the chat box their feedback. We were requesting, and many people have already shared in the chat box. Actually.
So, Veda, are you going to end the meeting?
Yes. Please let us end the meeting with a promise that we again come back with another new dimension of this whole work on women in peace building. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe and strong. Be healthy.
Thank you.
Love and peace.
Stay creative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And many happy birthdays.
Yeah.